When Major Pendleton Talbot and his daughter, Miss Lydia Talbot, came to live in Washington, they picked a house that was away from a quiet road. The house was old and made of brick. It had big, white columns at the front. There were tall trees in the yard, and a special tree that dropped pink and white flowers. There were also green bushes around the place. The house looked like the ones in the South, and that's why the Talbots liked it. They took rooms in this nice house. Major Talbot had a room to work in, because he was writing a book about stories from Alabama. Major Talbot liked the old times in the South. He thought about the days when his family had a lot of land and many workers. They had big parties at their big house. Guests from good families in the South came over. He still acted like those old times and wore old-fashioned clothes. His clothes looked very old. Major Talbot was tall, but when he bowed, his coat touched the floor. People in Washington saw many different clothes, but his clothes were really different. Someone even gave a funny name to his coat. But even with his old clothes, people in the boarding house liked Major Talbot. Some young men liked to hear him talk about the South. They never made him angry because he could look very serious with his sharp gray eyes. Miss Lydia was 35 and looked older because of her hairstyle. She was also old-fashioned, but she was different from Major Talbot. She took care of the family's money. She was the one who paid when they got bills. Major Talbot didn't like bills. He wished they could pay them all at once, maybe after his book was sold. Miss Lydia just said, "We'll pay bit by bit while we have money and see what happens next." Most people living in Mrs. Varderman's house went to work during the day. They worked in offices or shops. But one person was often at home. His name was Henry Hopkins Hargraves. Everyone used his full name. He worked at a theater. The theater was now a good place, and Mr. Hargraves was a polite man, so Mrs. Varderman let him stay in her house. At the theater, people knew Hargraves as an actor who could do different accents. He acted like a German, Irish, Swede, and even wore makeup to act like a black person. But Hargraves wanted to do serious comedy too. Hargraves liked Major Talbot a lot. Whenever Major Talbot talked about the past or told stories, Hargraves listened carefully. At first, Major Talbot didn't want to be friends with Hargraves because he was an actor. But soon, he liked the young man's friendly ways. Hargraves always laughed at the right time when Major Talbot read his stories. They became very close friends. Major Talbot loved talking about old times. He remembered even small things, like the name of a worker or the date when something happened. Hargraves always listened and asked questions. They talked about many things from the past, like parties, dancers, and old stories. Sometimes, after Hargraves finished working at the theater, Major Talbot would call him into his room. There, he would make a special drink with mint leaves. Major Talbot was very careful when making it. Hargraves loved watching him do it, and then they would drink together. After living in Washington for about 4 months, Miss Lydia realized they had little money left. Major Talbot's book was done, but no one wanted to buy it. They also didn't get rent from a house they owned. Soon, they needed to pay for their room. Miss Lydia talked to her father about it. "No money," he said, looking surprised. "It's a bit much to always pay these small amounts." "Really, The Major checked his pockets. He found a $2 bill and put it back. "I need to fix this now, Lydia," he said. "Can you get my umbrella? I'll go to the city center. General Falcom told me he'd help with my book. I'll visit him and see what's happening." Miss Lydia watched her father leave. He always did a special bow before going out. That night, he came back and said that the man with his book wanted to change a lot of it. The Major was very angry but acted calm with Miss Lydia. "We need money," Miss Lydia said. "Give me the $2, and I'll ask Uncle Ralph for some money." The Major put an envelope on the table. "I used the money to buy theater tickets," he said. "I thought you'd like the show. It's about the war and is kind to the South. I want to see it." Miss Lydia was shocked, but since they had the tickets, they went to the theater. They tried to forget their problems. The Major looked handsome. The play was about the South, and Major Talbot was interested. "Look!" Miss Lydia pointed to the program. The Major read Colonel Webster Calhoun. "Mr. Hopkins Hargraves." "It's our Mr. Hargraves," she said. "It's his big chance on stage. I'm happy for him." But when Mr. Hargraves came on stage, he looked just like Major Talbot. The same hair, nose, shirt, tie, and even the special coat. The Major was shocked and upset. Miss Lydia was also surprised. They watched as the actor, looking like the Major, acted in the play. Mr. Hargraves had copied the Major very well. He acted like the Major, talking and moving like him, but in a funny way for the stage. When he did the Major's special bow, everyone clapped loud. Miss Lydia didn't move. She tried not to smile, even though she knew it was funny. In one scene, Mr. Hargraves acted like the Major, telling stories and making drinks. The Major watched, feeling very angry. The stories were the Major's stories, but they sounded different. Mr. Hargraves even told one about a fight the Major had once. He told it with more energy and fun than the Major did. When the scene ended, the audience clapped very loud. They loved Mr. Hargraves' act. He looked happy when he took a bow. Miss Lydia looked at the Major. He was very upset. "Let's leave," he said. But Miss Lydia told him to stay. She didn't want people to see the Major's special coat after seeing it on stage. So they watched the whole play. The next day, Mr. Hargraves was not at breakfast or lunch. In the afternoon, he visited the Major. He had newspapers and was very excited. I did great last night, he said. Listen to this review. Mr. Hargraves acted like a real old Southern man. He was funny and real at the same time. The coat he wore was very special. People loved him. Then he asked the Major, "What did you think?" The Major was very cold. "I saw your show," he said. Hargraves looked surprised. "You were there? I didn't know you went to the theater." "Oh, Major Talbot," he quickly said. "Please, don't be mad. Yes, I used some things from you for the part, but it's just a general character, not you." The audience liked it because they know the type. "Mr. Hargraves," the Major said, standing tall, "you made fun of me. You broke my trust and were rude in my home. If I thought you knew how to be a true gentleman, I would challenge you, even though I'm old. Please leave." Hargraves looked a bit confused. "I'm really sorry," he said. "Here, we see things differently. Some people would love to be shown like that on stage. They aren't from Alabama." The Major replied proudly, "Hargraves, you remembered something from my book. Sometimes we stretch the truth when we talk in public and when we act in public," Hargraves added. But the Major was still upset. "You made fun of me. I can't forget that." Hargraves smiled kindly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. In my job, I use things from real life. But I came to talk about something else. I know you need money. I've saved some, and I want to help you." "Stop," the Major shouted. "You can't fix everything with money. I would never take money from you. I'd rather be hungry than accept your offer after what happened. Please leave now." Hargraves left without saying more. He also moved out of the house that day. Mrs. Varderman said at dinner that he moved closer to the theater where his play was showing for a week. Major Talbot and Miss Lydia had a problem. The Major didn't know anyone in Washington to ask for money. Miss Lydia wrote to Uncle Ralph for help, but they weren't sure if he could give any. The Major had to explain to Mrs. Varderman why he couldn't pay for their stay yet. Then help came from a surprising place. One afternoon, a worker said an old black man wanted to see Major Talbot. The Major asked him to come to his room. The old man came in, looking respectful and a bit nervous. He was dressed in old clothes. His hair was gray and white. He looked as old as Major Talbot. "I think you don't remember me, Mars Pendleton," he said. The Major tried to remember. "Help me remember you," the old man said. "Don't you remember Cindy's Mose, who left after the war?" The Major thought for a while. "Yes, you worked with the horses. Then you moved to the west, to Nebraska." Yes, the old man was happy. "That's me, Mose. They call me Uncle Mose now. Remember the young horses your father gave me?" The Major said, "I don't remember the horses, but sit, Uncle Mose." It's good to see you. How have you been? Uncle Mose sat down. I did well. I sold those horses for a lot of money. Then I opened a shop, bought land, and had a family. Then, a railroad was built near my land. Now I have a lot of money and property. The major was happy for him. That's great, Uncle Mose. Then Uncle Mose asked, and your little girl, Miss Lydia? I bet she's all grown up now. The major called out, Lydia, dear, can you come? Miss Lydia came in. She looked older and a bit worried. Look at you, all grown up. Do you remember me, child? The old man said. Miss Lydia replied, This is Aunt Cindy's Mose, said the major. He left our home when you were just 2. Miss Lydia replied, It's hard to remember from when I was so young, but it's nice to meet you now. The major was happy. Uncle Mose was a link to their happy past. They talked about old times. They helped each other remember. The major asked, What brings you so far from home? Uncle Mose said, I'm here for a big church meeting. I don't preach, but I help in the church, so they sent me. Miss Lydia asked, How did you know we were here? Uncle Mose said, A man from my hotel told me. But I also came to pay the major money. He took out a lot of bills. $300, he said. When I left, your dad told me to pay for the mules when I could. Now, I can pay. Check the money, the major was touched. Thank you, Uncle Mose. We really need this money, Lydia said. You take it. You can handle it. Take it, said Uncle Mose. It's your family's money. After he left, Miss Lydia cried happy tears. The major looked away and smoked. Soon, things got better for the Talbots. Miss Lydia looked happier. The major had new clothes. Someone wanted to publish his book. They felt good and hopeful. A week later, Miss Lydia got a letter from New York. She didn't know anyone there. Curious, she opened the letter. She started to read. Dear Miss Talbot, I have some good news. A company in New York will pay me $200 a week to act as Colonel Calhoun in A Magnolia Flower. There's more. Please don't tell Major Talbot. I wanted to thank him for helping me learn my role. He didn't want my money, but I gave it anyway. I had an extra $300. Best wishes, H. Hopkins Hargraves. P.S. Did I act well as Uncle Mose? Major Talbot was walking in the hall. He saw Miss Lydia's room door open. Did we get any letters today, Lydia? He asked. Miss Lydia hid the letter. We got the Mobile Chronicle newspaper, she said quickly. It's in your room. Thank you.